So, what I'm calling for is release of economic slavery of black survivors. I think that's quite important. Release from my status as a schizophrenic for 40 years. Every time I go to the doctor and say I've got a cold, he says, how's your schizophrenia? It's not bad. How's your schizophrenia, piece of shit? Sorry if I get angry with people, but this is my partner, the Queen. We broke up. She wanted a dual heritage child, but I got beaten to it. But she said to me, Colin. I said, what? We took your heritage. I apologise. We took your mental status. We rewarded you. She doesn't talk like that. I'm just pretending, just like, think about my voice, yeah? We legislated your disorder. We made you survive a European misconception, but now we need to change the acts and performances. So what does this aim to do? So I'm sick and tired of sitting in meetings, discussing, theorising, projecting about issues. It's a call for action. Does anybody know the person on the left? Oh, Hook, yeah, fantastic writer. What we're now calling for the release of people of colour imprisoned in the mental health system. We don't want to review the Mental Health Act. We want an emancipation from these models that have affected us quite seriously. So I've been in hospital for a week and I was released today, so don't think I'm violent. These are the injections they put in. My voice is changing. Yeah, so don't be afraid of me. A dismantling of a commissioning model that's turning us into economic slaves. What today symbolises this morning is working across borders. Race and racialisation is not the responsibility of any isolated individual. It's all our responsibility. So, this is my poem. Introduce myself as Mr. Insane, Psychotic. I love this. Schizophrenic. In England, I'm dangerous, difficult and threatening. But when I go into my family setting, I become a brother, son, father and uncle. When I was at school, I'm not sure if people remember this title, being educationally subnormal, Bernard Core, was the common definition and construction of people that didn't fit the educational model at that particular time. At college, I did maintain a white-free zone, but I knew in my dreams, my voices, that I was uniquely different. Sometimes I mumbled because I can't speak English properly. I can't articulate the concepts. When I walk into a public space, and it's really here people's fear of blackness, even though I don't see myself as black and fearful. And I know if I walk down the road, 16 people will cross over. 7 of them would probably get knocked down and die. So I've done a good piece of work. The insurance companies have made so much money, it's unbelievable. Police station abuse, heart problem, potential death case. Sometimes white people are a cultural misfit, colourless and maladjusted. Hospital, medicated, controlled, and misunderstood. So that's the poem I began to write. Has anybody seen this before? Can you just play this on here? Can I play this on the by pressing this? Just 2 seconds. So the context of this video, without sound, is a child picking which doll is favourite to them, how they conceptualise themselves and their self-identity. And what you see, about 70% of black children will pick a white baby. And then they'll pick a white baby because they look lovely and cuddly. And this research hasn't changed over time. So is it unconscious bias or is it biased consciousness? Which two is it? That's the choice we have to make. Just have to stop this crap. You can see the kids picking the children. I'm just trying to get to the next page to stop this. I'm trying to look efficient, but I don't know what the shit I'm doing up here. Keep talking, because the rest of it will be like shit. Okay. So, I don't get paid a lot, but I do have a good laugh when I get out. I know the people in the wards are waiting for me in the section papers saying, welcome back, Colin. Your bed's ready. So this is my origin of my psychotic Gemini world, and I'm caught between two worlds. And I find this very difficult. In the European-centric world, I know I have been produced before I'm even born. And there are disturbing theories that Sudan points out quite clearly that suggest we are eugenics, lacking intelligence, intellectually deficient. Somehow blackness is equated with lack of civilization. And that then transfers to how we see the mental health body. At this time, the mental health body is under great threat. But some of these are the legacy of the slave process. And let me be specific what I mean by slavery in terms of my definition. In my Afrocentric world, I know I have to put two things on to camouflage who I am. Frantz Fanon's brilliant notion of the mask. And I think all of us here have masks that we put on. Du Bois talks about the veil. One of the interesting things about understanding psychosis and institutional racism is you can transcend the relationship that makes you a psychosis. You can visualize, you can objectivize and examine it, but you can't stop the devastating impact. One of the things we need to move towards in the Afrocentric world is self-determination about who we are. And this comes from a person-centered approach. So this is the origins of the world I operate in. And it's very much like Paul Gilroy. I don't know if you've ever read Paul Gilroy's book about the Black Atlantic experience. So the historical context to psychosis and institutionalization is quite important. I'm sure Sudan has talked about this nasty piece of work called Cartwright. Who's heard of Depomania? Loads of you must have heard of it by now. Yeah, who's not heard of Depomania? All right, can you explain it to the person next to you so this kind of makes my work easier? Say that again? Have you heard of Depomania? Okay, it's quite important. I think it's a modern day schizophrenia. So Cartwright invented this term that if you ran away from your slave, you could be diagnosed with a mental disorder called depomania, which means that you were actually disobeying the political orders of that civil system. We now call it schizophrenia. That's my interpretation. But what it began to do is see the emergence of these models entering these interrelated systems of education, psychological, scientific, and racism as an unconscious software. Let me tell you this, we all have the software. It's not black, it's white. It's a software that we have. Some of us download it and check it, some of us don't download it. It's always there, computerized in the syntax of our brain. And what Goffman said, he was another piece of arsehole. Sorry if I'm being very political and delicate about these issues. Goffman wrote an awful book, and then he actually sneaked on the ward just to see what it was like for black people. He said, the closer you get black people to white people, they'll be more privileged. And sometimes you still see these processes activated when you're in mental health work. But the biggest issue for me was cultural schizophrenia. Little brought this in, that when you are out of reality to the world in which you don't understand, you see it as a schizophrenic, what that actually means as a psychosis. So I'm hearing and I'm feeling these values as I'm growing up. I'm hearing Bowlby, and I understand Bowlby talks about international detachment. You've got to understand, if you take someone away from their natural habitat, their process of socialization, and the historical context, something will happen to them. Yeah? But there's a particular madness with Europeans. Not they are mad, there's a particular madness in the European rationale. And whiteness seems to be a psychotic illness, because you have no awareness of what you do, and it leads to a risk to a particular race. That, for me, is a psychosis. And it's a dangerous way of using words like psychosis. Just look at two definitions. I'm really concerned about how we're looking at institutional racism. I think it's too simplistic. I think it actually undermines some of the real severe political implications. And I prefer Carmichael's model, because it's now 50 years. I don't know if you remember the Black Power Salute of 1968, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy. civil rights project for Olympic Games. That was the best period when we began to get together and look at the civil rights issues. Not the legal issues, the social issues, but the civil rights issues. And then you have this famous moment, 68, when the Black Power put their gloves up. One of the most misread moments in social history. This was not a Black Power salute. This is a human rights salute, working across border lines. I'll leave you to read that. Is that okay? If anybody wants copies of these presentations, they're £45 a letter. Because I've got to buy into this system somehow. Is that okay? You think I'm joking? I'm a sellout, man, when it comes to I'll just sit here and talk shit if I get the money. Okay. But there's something depoliticized by our definition. Because you can be unconsciously racist, you can be unwittingly racist, and somehow you're getting away with racism. I don't understand that. I mean, we got away with it. Macpherson got away with shit. You know, and we're still using this predominant term in institutional cultures like psychiatry, sociology, social work, and practitioners, thinking about this operational thing called unwitting. If it's unwitting, then it must be coming from somewhere. Unless we locate the pattern or the origins of that, we're not going to deal with it. And there's a cop-out for me. So I like the term, hasn't really changed a lot. In my life growing up, and I'm personalising my interpretation of my world, is that okay? Rather than actually putting this on the telly, this is what it's about. I'm entering whiteness in the absence of who I am. There's a mythology of racialization, because race can be a myth. It's a perception, but when it becomes reality, it becomes dangerous. So in the family setting, my family was pathologized as violent. And there were great books by Richard Wright, talks about a black boy in 1945. You know, how black men are seen as violated because of the legacy of slavery. Really misunderstood. But that cognitive message is held politically and institutionalized and becomes a psychosis of measurement. Secondly, the education. And if anybody wants to begin to read, and I said Bernard Corr, I don't know if anybody's heard of that book, I'm sure there's people at the back know it, How the Black Child is Made Educational Subnormal. If you bring a testing system that bears no reality to the individual you're talking about, you're going to see a psychosis. If you're going to bring a way of measuring mental health that has no reality to the economic and social parts of the individual, you're measuring psychosis. So what then happens? Mental health becomes a symbolism of race differences. Thomas Saz, who I do like read, said there's not such thing as mental illness. You know, and it's a radical model that people actually abide or don't abide by. River of Blood speech, another 50-year celebration of Enoch Power, who actually created the most painful, provocative, polarized period in our social history. And with Brexit, we are returning to those moments. This is my family, these little, I was going to say two little shits, but it's a child protection issue. I don't like them actually, I was trying to swap them for an iPad, but what could he do? Could have got iPod 5 for two of them. Both of them have mental illness, severe mental illness. We both failed our, anybody past 11 plus? Put your hands up, bastard. Bastard, bastard, bastard. Well, congratulations, I really hope you did well. Failed the problem plus. But there was this thing about, this challenge for me about being a Gemini and being a schizophrenic. Yeah? The Gemini was the internal world of Colin, the schizophrenic was the objective world that I wasn't part of. And being assessed as subnormal. Very powerful. Just to let you know, before you report me to a new child protection team, yeah, these kids are okay, yeah? The only thing they support Man United says they're being really abused in their lives, yeah? I know we've got some Arsenal supporters here, have we? Yeah, get out of the room. Let's move on very quickly. So there was structural discrimination taking place in the context, and this is becoming legalized. None of these acts have really been effective in challenging some of these processes. The Mental Health Act has not really changed anything. It's a camouflage, it's a deflection. Yeah? It doesn't, it legalizes institutional racism. When you say to someone, I'm taking you in under a Section 3, that's a legalisation of. It's not appropriately done, it's not properly assessed, there's no evidence base, there's no science. You've got problems. The Community Care Act failed the black community. The present 2014 Care Act, which is supposed to replace aspects of the Mental Health Act, has failed us. Even the human rights legislation, which the government wants to dismantle, has problems. For me, we don't use Modern Slavery Act enough. We don't think about the concept that the mental health system is a modern slavery. To imprison somebody, sign off a paper there and leave them, and then say, sorry, you're 17 times more. It's the most, it's going back to what Cartwright did in 1855, whatever. Can you give me a 5-minute warning when I'm finished? Yeah, thank you. 5 minutes? Anyway, moving on. So, for me, this is the misdiagnosis of my world, and I speak in the third person whiteness, because I believe there's aspects of me that have been affected by whiteness. It's not just about white people. Let's not get this right, because that's why it becomes difficult to talk about. Actually, we're talking about white people who are kind of like getting into the pain and the more problems and the challenge. It's not about that. It's actually representing what does it do to us that stops us talking about the concept of race. I was seen as educational and dyslexic, so I did this Arsenal support in the corner. Can you give this guy a round of applause, the Arsenal supporter? He did my spell check for me, well done. You got 2 wrong, but let's move on. Then I was hearing voices, but there were voices that were hearing about I was manic depressive. And every day I walked around with this label inside my head that I was manic depressive. Cried at night, couldn't get up, manic depressive, hearing voices. Because I had met the job description of schizophrenia. I'd been interviewed on the ward. And you know what it's like, you have an interview, it's like the job description. 3 people get up, they put their papers down, and one asks you, well done, you did that very well. You did that very well. Oh, that's a very good answer. Yeah, I reckon it's a Section 3, thanks very much. That's lovely. But what I didn't realise is what I was entering when I went from prison to Maudsley to 3 other breakdowns was the source of intervention into the black body is the most devastating thing you can ever experience. Has anybody said that ECT here, or medication, or being locked up in a padded cell, beaten up by guards? It's demoralising, and it still goes on. So this is me beginning to look at these challenges of survival and selling out, because then I began to sell out. Oh, you piece of shit. You've been challenging the system, now you've got money to be paid by the state. And so I went from Maudsley to college, O-levels, A-levels, and I qualified then as an approved social worker. And there's lots of people here who have gone through the process. And then you believe, am I trading my body for European accolade? Does that make sense? I felt like a kind of like a psychiatric bounty hunter. Do you know what I mean? Because they give you increments, it's bloody great. I said, look, do it by the body, I'll be out all night, yeah? And then you look at working alongside the enemy of your own misdiagnosis. The very people that misdiagnose you, you're working alongside. You're being inside the system, but you're seeing a particular disorder which represents their psychosis. It's really dangerous. I'd rather be sectioned than some of the things I saw in my practices. I began to get into Cartwright, managing this new slave trade, the mental illness in the community. And there's some great ASW here, but there's some really frightening stories we went through. You know, dragging people out their houses, putting people in vans, setting them up for 136 and getting them out the house. Do you know what I'm saying? Leaving them to the most dangerous pathological psychiatrists I've ever met in my life that are more fucked up than I've ever been. Yeah? Really dangerous stuff was going on. But no one said anything about it. It was like the silent witness of the Black Death becoming institutionalized. It was really scary. Once I had moved over to the other side, I began to decode whiteness as a mental disorder. Now, I'm not saying it's a mental disorder, but if we use simplistic terms like mental disorder, it feels like something is taking place institutionally, with GPs, consultants. And I was commissioning for civil and injustice. I wasn't commissioning for justice. One of the biggest changes that took place in this country was the split between case management and assessment, and the politicalisation of medical care has turned mental health into economic prostitutes, slaves, people that were actually not interested in the internal spirit but the objectivization of cost. If that sounds powerful, I don't apologise. So this, we go into the stages of production, because we talk about production, co-production. I can't talk about co-production because I've never worked in co-production. All I can tell you about what it's like to be produced, then I can tell you what it's like to work in co-production. I don't know if that makes sense as a concept. So for me, there's the European theoretical models that produced me before I'm even born. So I mentioned in the world where I've been produced. 5 minutes, fantastic. I thought you should get off. Sounds better. Production 2 is the stage in the home. When I left home, I cried profusely. My mum left me abandoned, exposed to the unconscious, corrupted practices of whiteness. It remained invisible to the teaching world. A set of cultural constraints with a formative primary setting as a foundation of mistrust. I went to the stage 2 of my psychosis and institutional racism with mental health work. I'm now aware I'm at primary school, like conscription. But this time I realised what blackness actually meant. Didn't like my lips, my broad nose, the deep brownness of my skin. These feelings. Someone getting upset? Oh, no. Oh, okay. These feelings of inferiority were reinforced by a school split between two types of mentality that rendered the black man as inferior. As I translate to this escalator, I'm going into prison. And I see a setting of symbolizing the black soul captured in a mental disorder through a collection of pathologies. It's waiting for you. It sits there. You embrace it, you think about it, you hate yourself. Because the next stage is probably the most devastating stage you'll go into, which you begin to go into Maudsley Hospital. As ironically, I'm now in Camberwell on the 4th floor, where I've just been released, and I'll have to go back this afternoon, and I walk past Maudsley all the time. And that's where my son goes for their treatment. In this last stage, for me, was the collusion with institutionalization. I have to take responsibility as a practitioner, a theorist, and somebody who's an activist, that I sometimes have to collude. And in my collusion, I may lose who I actually am. So I'm now involved in an informal investigation. What are the types of psychosis that actually exist? How do I activate new theories, research, and diagnosis that did not represent what I saw? And lastly, surviving stage 6. For me, research is paramount. I don't even remember a book by Ladner, The Death of White Sociology. If any academic students should read that in 1973, a revolutionary book that deconstructs the European centeredness of research. And this is the task, and it goes back to what Alison said. I have to sell it, I only say it once. Yeah, it's The Death of White Sociology, Jane Ladner. Don't worry, it's small, you'll get this at the end, is that okay? So this is the task of giving black men back their sensibility, often made non-sensible by professionals who are too afraid to talk about their perceptions. I want white people to talk about their perceptions. I want everybody to talk about their perceptions. I want a safe space. I'm no longer into this polarized space where we go off and then we come back and we're not in negotiating what this actually means to work together. The transactions raise the paradox of race and racism, where the physicality of whiteness is often valued as objective and awarded sensibility. And what I'm trying to say here, sometimes there is an inequality of ascribing intelligence based upon race differences. So just ended this, I want to get to co-production. Is that okay? I want to work with you. I want money to do it though. Yeah? And so I think there are things going on that need to come together. So there's the black perspective and the white perspective. And here we have Fanon and Du Bois, who are really interesting, and I think they transcend race. They really do. There's small racialization that's constructed. Race is not, it's what we construct in the room. That's what becomes race. That we don't walk into where stasis become that, it's your construction, and we can change it together. We also need to look at some of the great work that Finland's done around race and culture. And lastly, the white perspective has brought a lot of interest, and particularly white feminists have brought lots of interesting contributions to this debate. Frankenberg, for me, is really important. Nobody's ever worked with Frankenberg, remapping culture. But the last thing is, how do we get to the transcultural co-production stage? This is an amazing opportunity in this conference to sit down and talk together. It's the first time, and thank you very much for this. It's a unique opportunity that we need to talk about the scripts and performances that we use that stops us talking, sitting, being together. First thing I did when I came in here, I did like most black people did, sneak down by the back, went at the back. So how many black people at the back now? Yeah, did that at college. When I was at college, I always sat by the door so I can get out quickly. Yeah, so I'd be shooting at that door in 5 minutes. We need to look at racialized cultures within the research process. What is going on when we do research? Is the research instrument valid? Is it reliable? Why do we have to do it this way? Why? It doesn't drive me mad. The truth may not get us to the truth, it just gets us through a process where we think we're looking at the truth. Racialized meaning across the colour line. We need new models. So all these young people, gifted young people, the X factors of the future, must produce models that change our concepts where we reference. I've got to say this, you're the best group I've ever worked with today. And my book, which is, I think I've said it so many times when I come out, I just give a plug for it because it's nearly been finished. They diagnosed me as schizophrenic when I was really a Gemini. Seriously, that's the name of the book. And what we did, we extended the chapter to have white references about how we feel together. Well, I'm going back to hospital now. I'll see you later. Thanks for your time.